Yo, what's good? Welcome back. This is part 2 of the disaster iceberg. If you haven't seen the first one, I'm gonna link it down in the description, but other than that, we just about to hop right into it. Okay, so first, I realized after I recorded that last one that I missed a few, so I'm gonna run through those really quick and then get to tier 4 and so on and so forth type of thing. So here we go. Okay, so first up is the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and basically this was the nuclear disaster that happened in Fukushima, Japan at the nuclear reactor plant, power plant or whatever, back in March 11th of 2011. And basically the main cause of it was an earthquake that then caused a tsunami. And basically it crashed into these reactor cores, I guess, is how I would explain it. And they were trying to drain all of the nuclear waste and stuff out of it before it hit, but it caused a meltdown and basically knocked them over. I'm not gonna go too into it or break it down too much because there's plenty of videos that do it better than I could, so I'm just gonna give that little lapse of it, you know what I mean? And then we're moving on to the next thing. All right, so up next for the ones that I missed is the 1931 Central China flood, more commonly known as the 1931 Yangtze Huai River floods. Basically, these occurred from June to August 1931 in China, hitting major cities such as Wuhan, Nanjing, and more. It eventually accumulated into a dike breach, and basically fatalities from this event estimate why, they vary a lot, to be honest with you, just depending on who you ask. A field survey by the University of Nanking led by John Lawson Buck immediately after the flood found 150,000 people had drowned, and that this number represented less than a quarter of all fatalities for the first 100 days of the flood. The official report found 140,000 drowned and claimed that 2 million people died during the flood and either have drowned or died from the lack of food. So there was just too much water, people couldn't get supplies, people were drowning obviously because so much water, just hectic shit going on, you know what I mean? And basically a cholera epidemic happened the year right after, from May 1932. And basically it reportedly had 31,974 deaths and 100,666 cases. And basically there was just a ton of disasters hitting China right around the same time. They had this flood, this pandemic, just a ton of shit going on in China at the time. But anyways, we're moving on to the next one. Okay, so up next is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, it occurred in the Greenwich neighborhood of Manhattan, New York City, and basically happened on Saturday, March 25th, 1911, and it was the deadliest industrial disaster in the history of the city and one of the deadliest in U.S. history. The fire caused the deaths of 146 garment workers, and it broke down to 123 women and girls, and then 23 men who died from smoke inhalation, the actual fire itself, and falling and jumping to their deaths. Most of the victims were recent Italian or Jewish immigrant women and girls aged 14 to 23. So most of these people were super young, and this was probably just their first job right after getting off the boat here, you know what I mean? So basically, all the victims that were known, the oldest victim was 43 years old. Her name was Provenza Pano, and the youngest was a 14-year-old. Her name was Kate Leone, and there was another 14-year-old named Rosaria or Sarah Maltese. And basically, the factory was located on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. And the reason why so many people died during this fire is because the doors were locked. And basically, they sealed all these different exits because they were worried about people stealing from them. They were worried about the workers really stealing from them and you know what I mean, leaving with all their shit. So they basically locked these people in and they basically got trapped. Same thing as one of the last, the church fire. And basically this building still stands. It's now named the Brown Building, and it stands at 2329 Washington Place near Washington Square Park. And yeah, it's now a National Historic Landmark, and I think you can go check it out and stuff. So next thing is the Texas City disaster. So the 1947 Texas City disaster was an industrial accident that occurred on April 16, 1947 in the port of Texas City, Texas, obviously. And it happened at Galveston Bay. It was the deadliest industrial accident in U.S. history and one of the largest non-nuclear explosions. So basically, a mid-morning fire started on board the French-registered vessel, the SS Grand Camp. It was docked in the port, and basically, it detonated all her cargo, which was about 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate. So basically it blew up this, and this started a whole chain reaction of blowing up other ships throughout the port, and basically it hit a oil storage factory that was near the port, and it just was tearing up shit, you know what I mean? Like, there's no other way to say it. This one fire just kind of spread out, tearing up a bunch of shit. It ended up killing at least 581 people, including all but one of the Texas City Fire Department. So you gotta think about that. They had to hire a whole new group of people for this fire department after this one fire. And basically the disaster drew the first class action lawsuit against the United States government on behalf of 8,485 plaintiffs under the 1946 Federal Tort Claims Act. So that was all the ones that I missed, and now we're moving on to actual tier 4, so we really starting the video now. Alright, so starting off the 4th tier, we have another church fire, and basically this is the 1930 Costesti wooden church fire. In 1930, a devastating fire destroyed the wooden church. It was a small town in Argeș County, Romania, and it killed 118 people, mostly primary school and high school students. The event was known also in the Romanian press as Black Easter. The fire took place on April 18th, 1930, during a religious service on Good Friday, when hundreds of people from the Orthodox community gathered at a wooden church in town. It was built in the 18th century, and the church was no more than 48 square meters. So children, singers, and some elders gathered in the narthex, while parents listened to the service from outside. The fire broke out during the laminations from a candle that reached the like a wreath braid basically on the wall, and the fire was extinguished immediately, but without anyone noticing, the wreaths housed in the fire church ash also ignited. So basically this fire didn't just light the one thing that they saw on fire, it also lit a wreath that was going towards the attic. And basically a few minutes later the fire had started to spread already, because it was a super dry wooden church, you know what I mean? And basically dozens of people died from smoke inhalations and burns. The shingle roof also collapsed, crushing many people that were still trapped in the church, and only 14 managed to escape, of which they all died later from burns, basically within the same week. So RIP to all of them, 118 people. And yeah, church fires, man, I don't know. That's like the 3rd one that I talked about, I think, on this one list alone. So I don't know, man. You're not gonna catch me in the church anytime soon, man. Sorry, but we're moving on. All right, so up next we have the Dhaka garment factory collapse. Basically, the 2013 Dhaka garment factory collapse, I don't know why I'm having so much trouble saying that, also referred to as the 2013 Savar building collapse, or the collapse of Rana Plaza, was the structural failure that occurred on the 24th of April 2013 in the Savar Pizza of the Dhaka district in Bangladesh. An 8-story commercial building called the Rana Plaza collapsed, and it crushed a ton of people. All right, the search for the dead ended on the 13th of May 2013 with a death toll of 1,134 people. Approximately 2,500 people were injured, and they all got rescued from the burning building. And basically, it was considered to be the deadliest non-deliberate structural failure accident in modern human history, and the deadliest garment factory disaster in history. So the factory itself, the building contained, I don't know why I keep saying factory. It was a whole complex of buildings, you know what I mean? The building contained clothing factories, a bank, apartments, and several shops, and the shops and the bank on the lower floors were immediately closed after cracks were discovered in the building, and the building's owners basically ignored warnings to stop using this whole building after the cracks appeared. And a few days later, the building collapsed, and the whole thing just came crashing down. So if somebody warns you about some shit like that, make sure you take their advice, bro. Like, what are you doing?
What are you doing, crack? What the f?
Anyways, we're moving on to the next thing. So up next is the Bengal Famine. So the Bengal Famine of 1943 was a famine in Bengal province of British India, now Bangladesh, or West Bangladesh in eastern India. So during World War II, an estimated 2 to 4 million out of a population of 60.3 million died of starvation, malaria, and other diseases aggravated by malnutrition, population displacement, unsanitary conditions, and a lack of healthcare. Millions were impoverished. The crisis overwhelmed large segments of economy and catastrophically disrupted the social fabric of India, or all these places. Eventually, families disintegrated. Men sold their small farms and left home to work, or to look for work, not really even to work, or they joined the British Indian Army. And basically, women and children became homeless migrants, often traveling to Calcutta or other large cities in search of organized relief. And historians usually characterize the famine as an anthropologic or man-made, asserting that wartime colonial policies created and then exacerbated the whole crisis. And a minority view holds that the famine was the result of natural causes. So most people actually think that people caused this because of certain political stuff that was going on. I'm not really that political myself, but you know, if you're political, I'm sure you know what's going on back then. All right, so up next is the Bhola cycle. So the 1970 Bhola cycle was this devastating tropical storm that struck East Pakistan, which is now modern day Bangladesh. Also, if you're keeping up, that's 3 in a row for Bangladesh. So what the fuck's going on over there? I have no clue, but they can't catch a break on this list. So who knows, man. Anyways, it remains one of the deadliest tropical storms ever recorded and one of the world's deadliest natural disasters ever. So at least 300,000 people lost their lives during this storm, and it's estimated that around maybe 500,000 possibly did, but there's a recorded 300,000 as of now. It was primarily a result of the storm surge causing a huge flood that took out a lot of these low-lying islands around the Ganges Delta, and basically Bhola was the 6th storm to hit India during this whole cyclone season. It was also the strongest one. The cyclone formed over the central Bay of Bengal on November 8th and traveled northward, intensifying as it did, obviously, and it reached with peak winds of 185 kilometers an hour or 115 miles per hour. And basically on November 10th, it made landfall on the coast of East Pakistan. The storm surge devastated many of the offshore islands, wiping out villages, destroying crops throughout the regions. And in the most severely affected places was Upazila and Tazamudin. Over 45% of the population of 167,000 was killed by this storm. So pretty rough tropical storm. Worst thing I think we ever got in America was Hurricane Katrina probably, but anyways, we're moving on to the next thing, so let's get to it. Next thing up is the West Loch disaster. So the West Loch disaster was a maritime accident during World War II at Pearl Harbor U.S. Naval Base in Hawaii. It's not what you're thinking, because I was also thinking that this was just Pearl Harbor attacks, but this is completely different. This is the first time I ever heard about this. So the incident, which occurred just after 3 p.m. on Sunday, May 21st, 1944, began following an explosion in a staging area for landing ships, tanks, and other amphibious assault ships in West Loch. A fire quickly spread among the ships being prepared in Operation Forager, which was the invasion of the Japanese-held Mariana Islands. And basically over the next 24 hours, 6 LSTs sank, which are like those, if you ever played like the original Call of Duties or Medal of Honors, when you're like storming the beaches, it's basically those kind of things where you like load soldiers in and it goes onto the beach and you get out, you know what I mean? You hop out in water or whatever. So basically 6 of those things sank. 163 naval personnel died and 396 people were injured during this whole thing. A subsequent Naval Board of Inquiry never determined the exact cause of the disaster, but concluded that the initial explosion was caused when a mortar round aboard the LST-353 detonated during an unloading operation because it was either dropped or went off when gasoline vapors ignited. So basically this incident plus the Port of Chicago incident that happened 2 months later led to major changes in weapons handling practices within the United States Navy. And basically a press blackout was enforced and naval personnel were ordered not to talk about this incident at all. And basically it wasn't even declassified until 1960, and it's therefore not even well known. I've never heard about this. I never learned about this, so pretty weird. Basically, a lot of people think that somebody just dropped this thing and it blew up and basically started this whole kind of blew up this thing, then this blew up, caught fire, blew up, and yeah, so pretty crazy that nobody even knew about that. But anyways, moving on to the next thing. Up next is the Bhopal Gas Tragedy. So the Bhopal disaster, also known as the Bhopal Gas Tragedy, was a gas leak accident that happened on the nights of December 2nd and 3rd of 1984 at the Union Cabride India Limited pesticide plant in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India. So the industrial disaster is considered the world's worst in history. over 500,000 people were exposed to methyl acetate gas. The highly toxic substance made its way into and around all the small towns located near this plant. Estimates vary on the actual death toll, but the official immediate death toll was 2,259. In 2008, the government of Madhya Pradesh had paid compensation to the family members of 3,787 victims that were killed to the gas release, 574,366 victims. A government affidavit in 2006 stated that the leak caused 555,125 injuries, including 38,478 temporarily partial injuries and approximately 3,900 severely permanent disabling injuries. So this gas leak fucked people up, bro. Other than that, other estimates said that 8,000 people died within 2 weeks, and another 8,000 or more have died actually just since that gas release. So from probably other respiratory problems and shit like that came with it. But couldn't find too much else on this one, so moving on to the next thing. So this next thing was something that I almost didn't put on the list. I almost missed it, to be honest, but it's the Lake Nyos phenomenon. So basically, on the 21st of August 1986, a limnic eruption at Lake Nyos in northwestern Cameroon killed 1,746 people and 3,500 livestock. Basically what a limnic eruption or explosion is, it's also known as a lake overturn, and it's a very rare type of natural disaster in which dissolved carbon dioxide suddenly erupts from deep lake waters, forming a gas cloud capable of suffocating wildlife, livestock, and humans. So in a way, this thing just releases this giant gas cloud that basically just suffocates you. It suffocates animals and anything that's actually like breathing air and needs oxygen and all that.
Basically, death by lake fart.
The eruption triggered the sudden release of about 100,000 through 300,000 tons, or sometimes people say 1.6 million tons. So there's a big difference in what some sources say. All of carbon dioxide. The gas cloud instantly rose at nearly 100 kilometers per hour or 62 miles per hour. And then, being heavier than air, it descended onto nearby villages. So basically it fell because it's too heavy for the air, so it just kind of like falls. And basically it displaced all the air, suffocating people and livestock within 25 kilometers or 16 miles of this lake. So basically, since then, a degassing system has been installed at this lake. And the aim of this thing is basically just to hopefully prevent this or stop it from actually happening when the eruptions happen, or just stop them altogether. So pretty fucked up one, but anyways, moving on to the next one. This next one's a really short one too. So up next, like I was saying, is the Botswana elephant deaths. So this one is still like super mysterious, honestly. Not a lot of people even know what's causing this, but basically officials say that a total of 330 elephants are now known to have died from ingesting cyanobacteria. Poaching has been ruled out from the actual cause of death from these people, and basically what cyanobacteria is, that's these toxic bacteria which can occur naturally in standing water and sometimes grow in large blooms known as blue-green algae. And that's it. Like, just 330 elephants have just suddenly died from this. They don't really think that poachers are killing them, so it's still kind of like being researched right now. I couldn't find much information on it at all. If you guys can find something, please let me know. But other than that, man, I'm moving on to the next thing. I'm trying to get through this as fast as possible for you guys. I'm trying to bang this one out. So up next is the 1925 tri-state tornado. So basically, this is the deadliest tornado in US history and the second largest, deadliest registered in the world. So deadliest in US, second in the whole world for tornadoes. So basically, this tornado left a 219-mile long track. It crossed from southeastern Missouri all the way through southern Illinois and then onto southwestern Indiana. It is also the longest ever, basically, it's the longest tornado to have ever traveled far. Modern meteorological reanalysis, I'm just going with it, has suggested that an extremely long length pattern and lifespan reported in historical accounts are perhaps more plausibly attributed to multiple independent tornadoes belonging to this one tornado family, rather than a single continuous tornado, although not officially. So basically, people think that it was a couple tornadoes, like 2 or 3 tornadoes that all basically connected and made this one ginormous tornado, which is why it was able to travel so far. The tri-state tornado is recognized by most experts as an F5 tornado, which is the maximum damage rating issued by the Fujita scale, which is, I guess, how they actually scale out tornadoes. And
4 is good. 4 will relocate your house fairly efficiently.
Is there an F5? What would that be like?
The finger of God.
And basically, the tri-state tornado claimed about 695 lives in 3 states, and with over 600 people died in Illinois alone, and it injured about another 2,027. It caused an estimated $16.5 million in property damage, and that's worth at least 2.13 billion today, or in 2018 at least. So I couldn't find too much information on that one either, to be honest. A few of these I couldn't find a lot, so if you can find anything else, let me know, because I find this weird shit cool, so let me know. Next up is the Dust Bowl. So the Dust Bowl was this period of dust storms that greatly damaged the ecology and agriculture of the American and Canadian prairies during the 1930s. It came with like this big severe drought and a failure to apply dryland farming methods to prevent aeolian processes, which is wind erosion, caused the phenomenon. So basically it was just super dry out. There was a severe drought. Nobody was using the actual farming methods to stop the dry land from like flying around and like coming up and eroding. The drought came in 3 different waves: 1934, 1936, and then 1939 through 1940. But some of the regions of the High Plains experienced drought conditions for as many as 8 years. More than 500,000 Americans were left homeless. More than 350 houses had to be torn down after one storm alone. And basically the severe drought and dust storms had left so many homeless. Others had to close their mortgages. Basically they had to sell their houses. They had to abandon farms. Basically this just fucked up the entire kind of like, I guess I would call that the Midwest, being on the East Coast, but I'm not sure what they actually call that stretch of land. But anyways, some residents of the plain, basically they stayed around there and they died because of pneumonia and malnutrition, because there was no crops growing, there was nothing like that. It was a huge drought, bro, like, you know what I mean? Anyways, that one wasn't super interesting, to be honest with you. Alright, so starting out tier 5 is the Hyatt Regency collapse. So basically on July 17th, 1981, the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri suffered a critical structure collapse of 2 overhead walkways. They were loaded with party goers. The concrete and glass platforms, basically, they all fell down, crashing onto a tea dance, which was going on in the lobby. Killed about 114 people. It injured about 216 people, all right? Kansas City society was affected for years after this, with the collapse resulting in billions of dollars of insurance claims, legal investigations, and city government reforms. Basically, the Hyatt had just been built a couple years before this actually happened, and during a nationwide pattern of fast-tracking large construction builds, they reduced oversight and it caused major failures, clearly. Its roof had partially collapsed during the construction, and the ill-conceived skywalk design progressively degraded due to the miscommunication loop of corporate neglect and irresponsibility. Basically, the disaster contributed to many lessons and reforms to engineering, civics, and ethics of safety and all that, and to emergency management. It was the deadliest structure failure since the collapse of the Pemberton Mill over 120 years earlier, and it remained the second deadliest structure collapse in the United States until the collapse of the World Trade Center 20 years later. So 9/11 in the beginning of the tier list, I guess, or whatever this is, iceberg, and 20 years later, that was the thing that overtook this one as the biggest structure collapse. So who knows, man. Moving on to the next thing though. So this one is also a short one. The next few are kind of short, to be honest with you. There's not too much information out there, but we're gonna get to them anyways, man. So up next is the 1809 Portuguese Stampede. So it's referred to as the Ponte das Barcas bridge collapse. And basically, on this day, Portuguese citizens tried to cross a bridge as they fled from like army troops, and the bridge collapsed. It's as simple as that. It's estimated that 5,000 people lost their lives from this incident. that's all I could find for this one. So we're moving on to the next thing. So up next is the Love Canal tragedy. This one is also it's kind of weird because it takes place over multiple years. But anyways, like the last one, I'm just gonna give you the gist of this. So the Love Canal tragedy. Basically, Love Canal was originally meant to be this dream community. The vision belonged to a man from whom the 3-block tract of land on the eastern edge of Niagara Falls, New York was named William T. Love. So this dude created this kind of like little community called Love Canal. And basically he wanted it to be like this, his dream community, obviously, you know what I mean? Wanted it to be super nice. But basically before he had bought it, there's a bunch of shit that happened to it. All right, so in the 1920s, the seeds of a genuine nightmare were planted. Basically, the canal was turned into, it was originally this canal, all right? It was turned into a municipal and industrial chemical plant, or a dump site. Not even a plant, it was a dump site. So this is where they were pouring out all the chemicals and stuff, all right? Then 30 years later, in 1953, the Hooker Chemical Company, the then owners and operators of the property, covered the canal with earth and soil and dirt and all that stuff and sold it to the city for $1. All right, they sold this place for $1, this chemical dump. And then in the late 50s, about 100 homes and a school were built right over it on that site, all right? Perhaps, basically it wasn't his model city, but it was a solid working class community. And after about, you know what I mean, a few years and stuff, basically all these people started to develop different diseases and respiratory failures and stuff like that. You can look into it because it's a bunch of different people's stories and it's a bunch of different problems that came with living on this chemical plant or this chemical dump site. I don't know why I keep saying chemical plant, but anyways, it was kind of interesting looking into it. I couldn't find too much because it was just a bunch of different people's talking about what happened to them or whatever else. So by all means, go look at it yourself because I'm gonna move on to the next thing. Up next is the 2001 Gujarat Earthquake. So basically the 2001 G earthquake, also known as the Bihu earthquake, it was India's 52nd Republic Day, and it was at 8:46 a.m. IST. I'm assuming that's like Indian something time, standard time, I don't know. The epicenter was about 9 kilometers southwest of the village of Chabari in Bakachau Taluka of the Kutch district of Gujarat, India. The intraplate earthquake measured about 7.7 on the moment magnitude scale and had a maximum felt intensity of X, or extreme, on the Mercalli intensity scale. And the earthquake killed between 13,805 people and 20,023 people. So somewhere in that range it killed. It killed 18 southeastern Pakistanis. It injured another 167,000 and destroyed nearly 340,000 buildings. And that's really all I could find in this one. I couldn't find too much. Moving on to the next thing. We're almost done with tier 5 too. We got 2-3 things left. So up next is the Sword of the Tipu Sultan studio fire. Is up next. All right, the Sword of the Tipu Sultan is an Indian historical drama. It was first broadcast on the DD National in February 1990. I'm assuming it was a TV show. It was based on a novel by Badwa Gingwani. This drama was a portrayal of the life and times of Tipu Sultan, who was the 18th century ruler of Mysore, and the series was widely praised for its casting and grandeur. But basically, during the making of it, it faced a ton of different obstacles, including this giant major studio fire that burnt down the premiere studios, Mysore, and claimed 62 lives. And that's it. Like, literally, I looked this one up for like an hour or two. I could not find any more information on it, to be honest with you, other than the fact that it was this play or TV show. They really didn't even specify it. They just said that it was a historical drama. So anyways, if you can find something else on it, go for it. Up next though is the Road of Bones. So basically the R504 Kolyma Highway, which is in Russia, Far East Russia, it's this big highway, okay? That's the easiest way to put it. It's this big highway, connects Magadan with the town of Nizhny Bestachya. It was located on the eastern bank of Lena River and opposite of Yakatsu. And basically, like I said, it's this highway. And the reason why I got the name the Road of Bones is that this highway was built by people in labor camps, gulags. Like, it was just built by basically slave laborers and political prisoners and all this stuff. It's estimated, and basically when they died, they would throw their bones and stuff, you know what I mean, all in there. They were laid in the road, you know what I mean. So if you're riding on this road, there is bones in the road, around the road, making up the road. Nowadays, the road is treated as memorial, and the bones of as many as 250 through 1 million people are there. Basically, they all died while they were constructing it, and they were laid, like I said, either beneath the road or around the road. And as it was built on a permafrost, basically they just kept them right there. They just put them in the road instead of digging new holes to bury the body. And that was their whole reason for it. Other than that, not much on the Road of Bones. So we're moving on to the next thing. This next one, super fucked up, to be honest with you. So we're going into this a little bit. Still couldn't find too much on it, but anyways. The Soyuz 11 space accident. So the Soyuz 11 was this space operation, or the spaceship, I guess, whatever. It was the only crewed mission to board the world's first space station. All right, Salyut 1 or Soyuz 10. Basically, it had this. It couldn't dock because of it had like some weird latching problems. But anyways, the crew of this Soyuz 11 was Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. I'm hoping I got y'all names right, but anyways, they all arrived at the space station on June 7th, 1971, and they departed the space station, like they left, you know what I mean, for the mission, on the 29th of June, 1971. The mission ended in disaster when the cruise capsule depressurized during preparations for re-entry, and it killed the entire three-man group. And basically, the 3 people in this Soyuz 11 space mission, they're the only 3 humans that have ever died in space. Anyways, we're moving on. We're at the end of the iceberg. So, all right, so up first on this last tier of the iceberg is the Boston Molasses accident. So it's also known as the Great Molasses Flood. It was a disaster that occurred on January 15th, 1919. And basically, it happened in the North End neighborhood of Boston. And basically, a large storage tank filled with 2.3 million US gallons of molasses, which is like, in my eyes, molasses is just really thick maple syrup. If I'm wrong, let me know what it actually is, but...
Alright, you poor bastard. You asked for it. Molasses is a viscous substance resulting from refining sugar cane, or, in most cases, sugar beets into sugar, to produce molasses. Sugar cane is harvested and stripped of its leaves. Its juice is then extracted by cutting, crushing, and mashing. The juice is then boiled to produce a concentrate to encourage sugar crystallization. The result of this first boiling is called first syrup and has the highest sugar content. A second boiling produces what is called second molasses, which has more sugar extracted and has a slightly bitter taste. Blackstrap molasses is what comes from a third boiling and is the most bitter. Molasses made from sugar beet differs from sugarcane molasses. Only the syrup remaining from the final crystallization stage is referred to as molasses. Molasses contain significant amounts of vitamin B6 and minerals, including calcium, magnesium, iron and manganese. Blackstrap is also a good source of potassium. Due to this, it is sometimes used to produce ethanol, to act as an ingredient in cattle feed, or as a fertilizer.
That's what I've always thought it was. It weighed approximately 13,000 short tons, or 13,000 tons. Basically, this giant tank burst and the resultant wave of molasses rushed through all the streets, and it was going an estimated 35 miles per hour, which is fucking wild. Because if you've ever tried to pour like maple syrup and whatever, you know it's thick, so it's not like it's going super fast. But this shit was moving 35 miles an hour, or 56 kilometers an hour if you're from the UK or wherever else, anywhere else basically besides us here. It killed 21 people and it injured 150. And basically the event entered local folklore, and residents claimed for decades afterwards that the area still smelled of molasses on hot summer days. So I never heard about this until I was doing this. So hey, that's new. And I live in Boston type of thing. So, you know, You know, learn new shit every day, guys. That's it. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. All right, so up next is the Donora Death Fog. So the 1948 Donora smog, also known as the Donora Death Fog, it killed 20 people and caused respiratory problems for an estimated 6,000 to 14,000 people living in Donora, Pennsylvania. All right, so basically, this is like a little mill town on the Monongahela. I'm trying to read it, the name of it. I don't really know how to say it. Basically, this river is 24 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, which is like I think it's the capital. I'm a fucking idiot, guys. My bad. I think it's the capital. If not, it's the major city of Philadelphia. Oh my god, guys. Anyways, the event is commemorated by the Donora Smog Museum, and the fog basically started building up in Donora on Wednesday, October 27th, 1948. And basically by the following day, this fog was causing coughs and other signs of respiratory distress for many of the residents in like this giant community of people. All right, many of the illnesses and death were attributed to asthma at first, and then basically the smog stayed there for a few days, I think 4 days, until it rained on that Sunday, which was October 31st, 1948. And by which that time, which was like 4 days after the smog actually showed up, 20 residents of Donora died, and approximately 1/3 to 1/2 of the town's population of 14,000 residents had been sick. So they all caught some type of respiratory problem from this fog. Another 50 residents died later on within that same month, or November, because October 31st, you know? So another 20 people or another 50 people died the next month also of respiratory problems. And basically this fog was determined to be a mix of sulfuric acid, nitrogen dioxide, fluorine, and other poisonous gases that basically they all stayed there until the rain had just dissipated, because there was no actual change in weather going on at that time. And yeah, that was really it. So moving on to the next thing, because that was a pretty short one. So up next is the Hungarian toxic flood. So basically what this was, it was an industrial accident at a caustic waste reservoir chain that it took place at the Ajkai Timfoldgar alumina plant in Ajka, Veszprém County in Western Hungary. Hopefully I didn't mess that up too bad. Basically, on October 4th, 2010, at 12:25 CEST, the northwestern corner of the dam reservoir collapsed near number 10. Basically, this reservoir number 10 collapsed. All right, it freed about 1 million cubic centimeters of liquid waste from Red Mud Lake. The mud was released at 1 to 2 meters or 3 to 7 feet waves, basically flooding several nearby localities, including the village of Kolontar and the town of Deviskar? Maybe I messed those ones up, who knows. 10 people died and 150 people were injured, and about 40 square kilometers or 15 square miles of land were initially affected. The spill reached the Danube. Anyways, it was initially not clear as how the containment at the reservoir was breached, but although the accident came after a particularly wet summer that happened in Hungary, and basically police seized documents from this actual plant, although a spokesman for the MAL Hungarian Aluminum, like the actual company that the plant operates for, said that the last inspection of the pond had shown nothing untoward. And the Hungarian Prime Minister at the time, Viktor Orban, I think is how I say it, stated that the spill was presumably caused by human error. So basically, somebody just fucked up. They didn't do their job right, and this reservoir collapsed and freed a bunch of fucking nasty toxic waste and flooded out a bunch of places, and that's it. Killed 10 people, injured a couple 150. So anyways, up next is the 1856 lightning disaster. So basically on April 3rd, 1856, one of the worst catastrophes of all time happened on this day, okay? The Church of St. John on the Greek island of Rhodes was blown, like just blown away completely. And I'm gonna let you know how. Basically, this church called the Byzantine Church that was built 450 years earlier and was part of the Palace of the Grand Master, which had been home to the Knights of St. John. And basically, this was that place that happened. On the fateful night of its destruction, the residents were Ottoman Turks. A massive storm was terrorizing the city, and in those days, superstition dictated that the church bells be rung to ward off lightning. Alright, so a ton of people went over to this church. Every bell on the island was clanging away when the infamous bolt zapped its way down the steeple of the Church of St. John. Alright, the lightning made its way to the basement where the Turks were storing a ton of gunpowder. Alright, actually multiple tons, not just a ton, multiple tons of gunpowder. Alright, so this lightning basically zapped the church, traveled all the way down to the basement, contacted this gunpowder, and the resulting explosion leveled the entire church and the palace, and about 4,000 people died in this disaster. Now, it happened a long time ago, so there's no pictures or nothing like that, but this was the only information I could find on this thing. And I tried. I looked it up everywhere, but shout out to the dude that made this, because I'm pretty sure he's the one that put me on to the information for this one. So shout out to you, bro, if you're watching this far. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. So up next is the London beer flood. There's a ton of floods on this list. Oh my god, I can't get over it. First a molasses flood, and now this is a beer flood. So let's get to it. The London beer flood was an accident at the Mew & Co.'s Horseshoe Brewery at London on the 17th of October 1814. It took place when one of the 22-foot tall or 6.7 meter tall wooden vats of fermenting porter bursted open. All right, the pressure of the escaping liquid dislodged the valve of another vessel and destroyed several large barrels. Between 128,000 and 323,000 imperial gallons, which is, I guess, 580,000 through 1,470,000 liters, or 154,000 through 388,000 US gallons. I don't really know the difference, but whatever. All this beer got released, okay? The resulting wave of this beer destroyed the back wall of the brewery. It swept into an area of the slum dwellings known as the St. Giles Rookery. 8 people were killed. 5 of them were mourners at the wake, being held by an Irish family for a 2-year-old boy. So this beer flood basically fucked up this whole funeral for this 2-year-old, man. That's fucked. Anyways, the coroner's inquest returned a verdict that the 8 had lost their lives casually, accidentally, or by misfortune. So they basically lied. The brewery was trying to basically cover it up. The brewery was nearly bankrupted by this event, and it avoided collapse after a rebate from the HM excise on the lost beer. So I think they basically got a tax cut. You know what I mean? They had insurance probably on it, and they got paid out for it. The brewing industry gradually stopped using large wooden vats after this accident, and basically this brewery itself moved in 1921, and the Dominion Theater is now where this brewery used to stand. And the Mew & Co. actual company went into liquidation in 1961. So that's all I found for that one. But anyways, moving on to the next thing. So up next is the 2008 sugar explosion. So the 2008 Georgia sugar refinery explosion was an industrial disaster that occurred on February 7th, 2008 in Port Wentworth, Georgia, which is in the United States, not the country, okay? 14 people were killed and 40 were injured when a dust explosion occurred at a sugar refinery owned by Imperial Sugar. Dust explosions had been an issue of concern among U.S. authorities since 3 fatalities occurred in 2003, and basically efforts were made to improve safety and reduce the risk of recurrence. Basically, they didn't want this thing to happen again. But this refinery was large and old. It had outdated construction methods, and basically all these factors were believed to help this fire's severity because it just wasn't ready for this. It wasn't modern enough, you know what I mean? It didn't have things to stop this thing from happening. So the origin of the explosion has been narrowed down to the center of the factory. It is believed to have occurred in the basement beneath the storage silos, and investigations conducted by the Department of Justice ruled out deliberate criminal activity in 2013. So a few years later, they basically stated that nobody was purposely trying to do this, and basically the U.S. Chemical Safety Board, my bad, yo. the U.S. Chemical Safety Board released its report on the incident in September 2009, saying that the explosion had been entirely preventable. And basically, investigations by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or the ATF, also concluded that the sugar dust was a fuel for an explosion that could have been prevented. And by September 2010, 44 lawsuits had been filed in Chatham County Court against Imperial Sugar and or its cleaning contractor, and only 18 of them to this day have been settled. So hopefully the rest of them people make their money, because like, bro, if the thing was completely preventable, then why the fuck didn't you prevent it? Like, I don't know, it seems easy enough to me, man. Just do your job. Cuz anyways, we have the second to last thing on this tier. So second to last thing on this whole iceberg, and basically this one had almost no information. It was the same exact article everywhere I looked. There was about 20 different things that I kind of looked into for this. Couldn't find no information. So this is the Norwegian cheese fire. Basically, this truck carrying a bunch of Norwegian cheese. It's this brown, like caramelized brown kind of goat cheese. It's called brunost. And basically this truck was carrying about 27 tons of this stuff. When he noticed driving through this tunnel, he looked back, you know what I mean? And he sees that it's caught fire. And he's like, oh shit. Hops out. And basically it was driving through the Bratteli tunnel that's in Tingsfjord in northern Norway, and this all occurred in January of 2013. Basically this fire that caught in this like little tunnel, it raged for 5 days, and smoldering toxic gases were slowing the recovery process. Basically they just couldn't get to it until the fire was out, and the cause of the fire was not determined. They just said that this cheese was highly flammable is all I found anywhere I looked, and that was about it for that, to be honest with you. If you can find more stuff on it, let me know, because everything I said was everything I found. So anyways, all right, so last thing on this whole iceberg is the worst thing, to be honest with you. I saved it for last. It was up a tier, but I moved it down myself, so don't be too mad at me. But this is, to me, the worst thing on this list, because it's just pure humans being terrible. Like, that's all I can say about it, you know what I mean? Anyways, this is the Nanjing Massacre. This event was a mass murder of Chinese civilians that occurred in Nanjing, which was the capital of the Republic of China at the time. It happened immediately after the Battle of Nanjing, which was in the Second Sino-Japanese War, and it all was like done by the Imperial Japanese Army. So beginning on December 13th, 1937, a massacre that lasted for 6 weeks started, all right? The perpetrators also committed other atrocities such as rape, looting, and arson, all right? The massacre was one of the worst atrocities committed during World War II. Like I said, I learned about this in school. I'm sure most people know about this, but this is clearly the worst thing on this list, all right? Because of the myriads of factors is why it's horrible, all right? Death tolls estimate from about 40,000 to over 300,000, with rape cases ranging from about 20,000 to over 80,000 cases. So these people were just causing havoc, you know what I mean? Like, they was killing people, they was taking what they wanted, doing what they wanted, like robbing your house, doing whatever they wanted. Like, I'm sure you catch my drift. Anyways, the most sophisticated and credible scholars in Japan, which included a large number of authoritative academics, supported the validity of the International Military Tribunal from the Far East and the findings, which estimated at least 200,000 casualties. So 200,000 people died at this event, and at least 20,000 rapes happened. So anyways, if you watch this whole thing, shout out to y'all. I think I just passed 100 subscribers, which is fucking insane. So yeah, if you haven't tapped in yet, bro, make sure you tap that subscribe button, like it if you want to. I don't really see how that affects it all, but hey, whatever, do whatever you want to, man. Drop a comment, let me know what you think, and I'm gonna have the next part, which is the first part of the 5th tier of the lost locations, lost/mysterious locations, I guess, iceberg. That's gonna be out sometime this week. And then I'm trying to just do some solo kind of videos on some random shit that, you know what I mean, I be seeing. So who knows, man, you know, just tap in, subscribe. We'll never know where this thing's gonna get us. Anyways, I'll catch y'all later. Stay dangerous, free the guys, and get laid. So, deuces.